News. The Obama administration is easing more sanctions against Cuba. That includes eliminating a $100 limit on Cuban rum and cigars American travelers can bring home. Limits are also being lifted on cargo ship travel between the two countries and on some joint medical research. The changes take effect on Monday. In North Carolina, the death toll from Hurricane Matthew has risen by 2, bringing the total in the state to 24. Flooding triggered by the storm forced thousands from their homes. At least 40 people were killed in the U.S. and more than 500 died in Haiti. The UK's exit negotiations with the EU will be controlled by a select group of 12 ministers from Prime Minister Theresa May's cabinet, most opposed to increasing powers of the 28-member bloc. That's according to unpublished documents obtained by Bloomberg. It could be another sign the Prime Minister is planning a clean break from the union. In Thailand, tens of thousands of people line the streets of Bangkok to pay final respects to King Bhumibol Adulyadej. The world's longest reigning monarch died Thursday at the age of 88. His body was transported from the hospital to the palace this morning. Bhumibol's only son and heir apparent led the procession. The mourning period in Thailand will last a year. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists around the world. Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Selina Wang, in for Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, is Twitter destined to remain an independent company? The company loses one of its last potential buyers as Salesforce bows out of the running. Plus, the growth strategy for Chinese companies with global ambitions. We'll discuss with DCM co-founder David CHAO. And 10 years ago, the founders of Box got their very first VC check. We'll hear the story of the 4 childhood friends now leading a $2 billion company. But first to our lead. Twitter shares take another tumble after losing what some still considered one of its last options for a buyout. Salesforce is officially out of the running. Its stock jumped on the confirmation today as investors breathed a sigh of relief that CEO Mark Benioff wouldn't spend billions on a departure from its core business. Other reported suitors, including Google and Disney, have also backed out recently. So what's next? Bloomberg's global head of tech coverage, Brad Stone, and Eric Newcomer join me on the set today to discuss. So Brad, we had already reported last week that Salesforce was likely going to drop out, but the stock price today makes it seem like investors still had hope.
Right.
So at this point, who is left?
And now it's official, right? If this were an Agatha Christie novel, it would be, and then there were none, right? No Google, no Salesforce, no Disney. I mean, look, Twitter, stagnant user growth, stagnant revenue growth, an environment that can be best described right now as rancorous with everything that's happening in the U.S. political system. But look, I mean, there's always a price, right? And it remains to be seen. The company's valued now at about $12 billion. It probably wanted a premium. If the price goes down, do we see Google getting back in? I would say perhaps.
So it seems like there might still be some chances if the price comes down.
There always is.
I mean, Eric, what do you think? Do you think it's over? We can stop talking about it? It can be independent?
I mean, I'm sure there's a price, but I mean, when you have Salesforce investors pressuring Benioff not to buy the company, I think that's a pretty strong sign that any company that buys Twitter is going to face heavy scrutiny from their investors, and that's a problem. You want to make an acquisition, you want people to be excited. You think you're, buying a huge social media company like Twitter, the media would go crazy, but you're in a landscape right now where people are going to look at you like, what are you doing?
It seems like Jack Dorsey might be happy about all this. He wanted it to be independent. Sarah Friar had reported that he wants longer to prove out his live video strategy. Brad, do we know the status of how that's actually going?
It's still early. I'd say it's intriguing. We're week 6 of the NFL. I think they got 3 million viewers for the Broncos game yesterday. Of course, Bloomberg Technology, this show, we've only started going live on Twitter this week. I do think it will be tough. Twitter is playing in the big leagues. They will have to spend for content against Google and Apple and Amazon, but it's early. We should give them the benefit of the doubt.
So another big story no one could have missed this week is Samsung. New reports saying that their losses are widening to $3 billion from the $2 billion that were previously reported. Brad, How is Samsung going to make up for all these losses?
Right. Well, I mean, let's put it in perspective. The Note isn't even their biggest phone, right? That's the Galaxy S series. It's a hit it's a hit to the brand and the reputation more than anything. They've got it's a diversified company. They got a growing semiconductor business, but look, they've got to earn back trust. I mean, these headlines are terrible for the company.
And it's hard to earn back trust when the mystery surrounding what exactly went wrong is still hanging in the air. I mean, Eric, what did we learn that's new this week about what actually caused all of this?
I think we learned about our uncertainty here. We thought, okay, we figured it out, it's the battery, we're going to recall these phones, we're going to put out a new phone, and then when we find out that that might not be the case, I think that's sort of terrifying. And now Samsung's moving away from the Note 7 altogether, so I think it's a terrible mystery for Samsung and puzzling for the rest of us.
Could be good for some other brands, right?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, Google's launching a new phone right now. We're about to go to the holiday season. Good for Apple.
But let's be clear, it's terrible for Google. I mean, Samsung's their largest partner, right? And this, do people go to the Pixel phone? More than likely, they go to the iPhone. So this is probably overall bad for Google, bad for Android. The Pixel phone, like the Nexus phones, will have to see how much Google gets behind it. What's the marketing spend going to be? Are the carriers going to promote it? That's always been the challenge with these Google-branded handsets.
So it seems like it's bad for everyone, and it just keeps on getting worse and worse for Samsung. New investigation showing the phone they replaced it with also has issues. Can Samsung recover from this?
I think yes. I think that the next Galaxy phone, the S8, early next year is going to be huge. And one would think that they are slowing down rather than speeding up, because that's what got them into trouble with the Note 7. And making sure they make a very big splash with the phone. A lot of people are going to be watching this phone and looking at how Samsung does.
Mm-hmm. And would we say that consumer sentiment has definitely changed around the Samsung brand?
I think it'll take time to say. I mean, companies come back from worse things before. I mean, automakers come back from terrible problems, but I think especially because it's a premium phone, like that's what's particularly troubling. You think that would be the one that's not going to explode.
And so now I really want to talk about Snapchat. They're moving closer to their IPO. They've picked their bankers, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. Brad, it's interesting because what people are investing in now may be very different in the coming years. Snap, the parent company, on their new website, it calls itself a camera company.
They kind of rebranded, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, what are investors going to have to consider in this IPO?
It's going to be a little bit of a leap of faith. I mean, on the one hand, it's pretty encouraging, right? This is a company that's thinking very deeply about its place in the technology ecosystem, that realizes that they have a set of dangerous dependencies around phone makers and camera makers, and they want to move upstream and experiment with hardware. That they're going to think about creating the future that they want to live in. Now, let's caveat, though, that technology companies in the past have not covered themselves in glory by putting a pair of internet-connected spectacles on people's faces.
Hashtag Google Glass.
That's right. That's right. But maybe Snapchat can do it.
What do you think? Can they get into hardware? It's totally different ball game from pure.
I think the way Snapchat has set expectations here has been hysterical. Like you said, I mean, Google Glass ended up being a disaster because it was hyped for so long. Snapchat's like, oh, it's just a toy on the one hand. On the other hand, we're going to totally rename the company, call it Snap, and say that we're all about cameras. So somehow they've convinced us to judge them by, is it fun? Do a couple people buy it, and have some fun with it? But at the same time, they're saying, oh, the company's about much more than just, a Snapchat.
Would you guys wear those?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Did you get a pre one?
No, I'll have to betray Warby Parker. Are they prescription? I don't even know, honestly.
I don't think we know.
It's very secretive. What about you? I mean, as a millennial
of course,
yourself,
wannabe,
right?
yes.
Wannabe millennial.
Yeah.
Would you buy them?
I have a hard time imagining it, but we'll see. I mean, the great thing for Snapchat is that this will bring the hardware closer to the user experience. Maybe they can do things with that camera that we can't do now with phones. Mm-hmm. I'm not a heavy Snapchat user, but I think that's Snapchat's challenge, Snap's challenge to bring in the olds, let's call them.
Okay, and Eric, super quickly, what else might we have missed in tech this week?
Yeah, I sort of sum up the week in our weekly newsletter. One story is Uber's going headstrong into Latin America. Their busiest cities in the world are Mexico City and Sao Paulo, so doing a lot of business there and wanting to grow. You can read about it in Fully Charged and subscribe.
Yeah, no, Eric writes a great letter every Friday. Thanks so much for joining us, Eric. And Brad, you are staying with us. Plus, the growth strategy for Chinese companies with global ambitions we'll discuss next. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out now on the radio. You can now listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on Sirius XM. This is Bloomberg. Chinese customers are reporting call connection problems with Apple's iPhone 7. Complaints on the QQ instant messaging platform say the phones can't receive incoming calls from mobile networks in standby mode. Customers are also complaining about Apple's customer service. China represents about 20% of Apple's sales. The company did not respond to requests for comments about how it's dealing with the issue. Meantime, Apple CEO Tim Cook is spending time in Japan, a market where Apple products still dominate. A day after visiting Nintendo, Cook met Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. On the agenda, Apple's Yokohama Development Center in collaboration with Japanese firms. It's the Apple chief's first trip to Japan since taking up his post 5 years ago. Turning now to China, where the country's largest internet companies have been making strategic foreign investments, growing their presence across global regions. How is China's tech sector looking at Western markets? Still here with me is Bloomberg's global head of tech coverage, Brad Stone, and DCM co-founder, David CHAO. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
David, I know you're very familiar with Tencent. They're an LP in your fund. I want to get your thoughts on what is their thesis behind their investments. They made a big bet in Didi. Did they know at the time it was going to be so important in tandem with WeChat?
Well, I think Tencent's investment strategy is actually largely driven by their fundamental thesis for global investments is just betting on the best companies around the world. I mean, when they first invested in Didi, they had no idea there would be synergies with some of the other Tencent products. And obviously there is now, using WeChat to order a cab through Didi, et cetera. So I think it's very consistent from the fact that, it's the fastest growing Uber-like service in China, and they bet on it.
Yeah, I was recently in China as well, talking to Cheng Wei, the CEO of Didi, and getting a little bit of the history of that remarkable company. And it just struck me as how the story is so amazing, and how really the integration with WeChat at the beginning of 2014, after the red envelope promotion around the Chinese New Year, Tencent realizing how powerful mobile payments would be and kind of propelling Didi along with its investments in rivalry, of course, with Alibaba. You sort of wonder if Didi happens without Tencent and the huge investment that it made in WeChat and WeChat payments at that time. Do you think we'd be talking about Didi as a global powerhouse and an Uber rival if we didn't have that payments battle in China?
Well, I think it definitely gave them a boost. But I actually think it became a capital game. Whoever had the largest ability to raise money can subsidize many of the promotions that they had. I mean, for a while in China, some of the rides were free. Some of our employees in China was telling me that it only cost them 50 cents to drive.
Not sustainable.
To go on Didi, while it costs more riding a public bus or subway. Yeah. So I think it was a major capital game, and I think that's the biggest reason why Didi won.
Do you think Tencent ever tries to replicate the WeChat ecosystem in the United States?
I think they're slow and steady in the U.S. They don't release some of their numbers, but I think it's steadily growing. But they also know that, particularly for social networks and messaging in the world today, it's actually quite a local market. So, Korea, you have KakaoTalk, which we invested in. Japan, you have Line. China, you have WeChat. And I think they are mature enough to understand that in the US, it's probably not going to be WeChat, but I think they can still invest in the companies that will become the WeChat of US.
So speaking of WeChat being slow and steady, wanting to invest in things in the US, I mean, what about Twitter? Would that make sense for Tencent to acquire potentially?
Well, I think there's two sides to that answer. On the one hand, I don't think Tencent likes to invest in companies that are actually on the slight decline. The flip side is, it's quite a good fit in the sense that Tencent does not have a property like Twitter even in China, because Weibo is completely dominant as the Twitter of China. Of course, it's at the end of the day, it's a social network. It has 340 million worldwide, and in the U.S. alone, they have 55 million. So it's possible, but being anonymous, meaning Twitter, many people can make multiple accounts, use any name. So I think the fit between anonymous versus WeChat, where it's much more identity-based, is probably not the world's best fit. However, as I said before, I think Tencent just wants to bet on the winners and the next generation big hits.
And what about Alibaba's intentions in the U.S.? I mean, why did they invest in Snapchat? I spoke with Joe Tsai recently for a story I wrote, and all he would say is, I really admire Evan, I want to learn from him, I think he's a great guy, but no more details beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I think compared to Tencent, Ali's investments, particularly in the U.S., it's more strategic in the sense that almost 80-90% of the deals relate to their e-commerce practice. And however, I think they've always wanted a social networking property. They started, their first foray in the US was Tango. And I think as Tango went kind of flat, they figured they should go after another property. And I think Snapchat is a natural extension of their desire to get into some form of social networking. But, we shall see.
I mean, it seems like Alibaba's made more large deals in the United States than Tencent. They've been making lots of small size investments and made some big acquisitions in just gaming. I mean, why isn't Tencent making more acquisitions in the US?
Well, I think Tencent is quite smart about getting into the US from the perspective that, they know even in China, the companies that do well when they get foreign investment or acquisition offers is the ones where foreign investors don't take majority of the shares. And I think Tencent realizes they're really betting on the entrepreneur. And so they don't want to buy up a company and demotivate the entrepreneurs. And the track record of entrepreneurs staying after acquisition is not great.
Okay, I also want to get onto SoftBank, which just announced they were doing
Huge fund,
$100 billion fund with the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. What do you make of that, Brad? How is that going to change the landscape with such a big player in it now?
I mean, it's a massive amount, right? And we're seeing, again, the Saudi Arabian investment fund coming in there. And I mean, we saw that investment in Uber last summer. I mean, I wonder if it allows, technology companies to kind of keep investing, maybe to keep doing somewhat economically irrational things. I mean, it does show that, SoftBank wants to be this global player. And even though, they've had some problems with Sprint in the US and their quarterly performance, that they are still, the most aggressive players at the poker table right now.
David, I mean, what do you think? What kind of deals are they going to be hunting for? I know SoftBank has backed your fund, DCM.
Well, I think for SoftBank it makes a lot of sense because, yes, they are known to be a carrier in Japan, but they're also probably equally known for their investments. So I think it makes sense. I think trying to get the $100 billion is because the ante to get into many unicorns today, who are going to be the future winners, require a bigger check size. And I think it makes a lot of logical sense that they raise the large fund to get into some of these deals.
So strategically, where does this move SoftBank? I mean, does this kind of fit into their recent acquisition of ARM, which was also a big one?
Absolutely. If you look at how SoftBank paid for ARM, they certainly leveraged more, and they had to, sell some Alibaba shares. And I think with the $100 billion fund, they can actually invest without, having to sacrifice whether the ownership of Alibaba or sacrifice, leveraging his operating company more. So I think it's a win-win.
And another unicorn I've been watching closely is SoFi. You sit on their board. We had reported that they were in the process of raising $500 million. How is fundraising going?
I think officially the answer is we may not be fundraising, but unofficially I think the fundraising is going very well. Very well.
Will we see interest coming from Asian investors?
Yes, I think many Asian companies still want to get into the fintech space. Obviously, in China, a lot of the P2P lending has slowed down. And even in the U.S., I think the original fintech fervor last year is a little bit gone. But I think SoFi really broke through this year. They're doing more than $10 billion in loan originations, already on a $100 million earnings run rate. And so I think the world has now recognized, SoFi is the winner. They're number one. They're the largest fintech company in the U.S. And, the Asian companies want to learn from the CEO, Mike Cagney, who's just a, brilliant strategist.
Well, thank you, David of DCM, for joining us, and Brad Stone, our very own executive editor at Bloomberg Technology. A reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays at 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in San Francisco. More Bloomberg Tech next. This is Bloomberg. In the latest tech revolving door, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek is consolidating power at the top of the world's largest music streaming service. Ek is taking on the role of chairman from his co-founder Martin Lorenzen, who held the position for the past decade. Lorenzen will stay on as vice chairman. The changes come as Ek leads the company towards an IPO planned for as soon as next year. Also moving, the chipmaker Imagination Tech. Shares sunk more than 5% of reports that Apple was hiring away several high-level staff members. As many as 25 employees and executives reportedly left the company, including the former COO. Spokesperson for Imagination Tech acknowledged that a small number of people have left, but said there is no took their company to a $2 billion market cap.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. 2 more women came forward Friday to accuse Donald Trump of sexual misconduct. The Republican presidential nominee told a rally in Greensboro, North Carolina, the accusations aren't true.
Right now, I am being viciously attacked with lies and smears. It's a phony deal. I have no idea who these women are. Have no idea. I have no idea. And I think you all know I have no idea because you understand me for a lot of years, okay?
Trump's running mate Mike Pence told the Columbus, Ohio TV station he believes Trump's denials, and he accused Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton's campaign of taking focus from the issues that are affecting the American people. President Obama says, quote, democracy's on the ballot in November. Campaigning for Secretary Clinton Friday in Cleveland, Ohio, the president criticized Donald Trump for claiming the election is rigged.
Her opponents made it pretty clear he's just going to drag this election as low as it can possibly go. And he figures that if he makes our politics just toxic, then maybe you'll just figure out you got no good choices and you just get discouraged and you just don't vote. But don't fall for it.
The president said some nations do rig elections, but they're tyrannies that oppress their people. House Speaker Paul Ryan, who's been under siege from fellow Republicans for his unwillingness to help Donald Trump, Friday tried to draw distinctions between the GOP and Hillary Clinton. Addressing college Republicans in Madison, Wisconsin, the speaker accused Clinton and liberals of pursuing a government-heavy agenda for elites.
They want what America that doesn't stand out. They want an America that is ordinary. There's kind of a gloom and grayness to things. In the America they want, the driving force is the state. It is a place where government is taken away from the people.
Ryan's comments were his first significant public statement since he privately told House Republican colleagues that he'd no longer defend or campaign for Trump, whose name the speaker did not mention during Friday's address. Turkey's eager to join the coalition to liberate the key Iraqi city of Mosul. President Recep Erdogan says his country is, quote, determined to take part in the mission, despite calls from Iraq for Turkey to withdraw its troops. President Erdogan plans to make a formal proposal to join the coalition, but says Turkey has a plan B, and he says a plan C if the request is rejected. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Selina Wang, in for Emily Chang. We now turn to the story of Box. The cloud storage company received its very first initial round of venture capital funding 10 years ago this week. The four founders first met in elementary school in Seattle before dropping out of college to start the company. Emily Chang sat down with Jeff QUEISSER, Sam GHODS, Dylan Smith, and Aaron LEVIE and asked them how they've managed to grow Box to a $2 billion market cap while staying friends all the while. Take a listen.
I think the secret is just that we're actually all friends, and we've always kept anything that in the business sphere to be focused on the issues as opposed to anything personal. So sort of always rise above anything that could pull us apart.
And you guys go on a weekend retreat every year, just the four of you. How often do you do the four of you sort of convene and talk to each other as a group?
I think just throughout the day, we're always interacting with each other and running into each other, or being in various meetings together. Yeah, just to continue on Jeff's point, I just remember many instances where me and Aaron, or me and Jeff, or me and Dylan would have, or all of us together would have these really, really intense conversations, especially around business issues or around some big decision we have to make. I remember one instance in particular, me and Aaron were having this very, very, very kind of back and forth about this idea, whether we should do this or that. And it got really quite heated and quite intense. And I remember after that, Aaron was like, okay, do you want to go shoot some pool? And we went and shot some pool, and it was never even happened, And so that separation really is quite powerful.
I know, Aaron, you went in 4th grade.
Yes.
Right? And then tell me, how did this all come together?
He was in 4th grade, I was in 5th grade. I just moved into the neighborhood, and he was, I think, taking apart sewing machines or something at the time, and I was instantly attracted to that. Blenders. And I was like, who is this cool guy who takes apart blenders? And I should probably get to know him. And I knew no one else, so it was a natural fit. And then Dylan and I played trumpet together in 5th and 6th grade, must have been. And then Sam moved into our city, and eventually first knew Jeff, and then we all kind of started getting together.
So then how did the idea for Box actually come about? Tell me about the genesis of that.
Yeah, so we had all done various sort of business ideas throughout high school and at times middle school together. And in college of my sophomore year, Sam and I went to the same school, and we were always kind of talking about different ideas and business ideas, and had this idea for a secure way to store files in the cloud and be able to access data from anywhere. And I pitched Sam on the idea, and he didn't want to have anything to do with it. And then eventually told Jeff about this idea, and I think you maybe considered it for an hour or two. Yeah. And then eventually was uninterested. But eventually Dylan, who was across the coast at Duke, talked to him about it, and I think maybe based on how little he knew, he was interested, and that was what kind of kicked it off.
Yeah, so it's either the most gullible or the most visionary. But,
How did you decide, Dylan? How did you decide who'd have what job? who'd do what within the company?
Yeah, so between Aaron and me, it was a pretty natural sort of falling out of the roles and responsibilities. I mean, he's much more focused on the brand, the product side, the visionary around the technology. I'm naturally drawn toward the metrics, the business model, the operations, a lot of those things. So I don't know if we even ever had an explicit conversation about exactly who would do what. It just, as we started working on the idea together, things just sort of naturally separated out.
Now, at some point, somebody cold emailed Mark Cuban. Who did that?
I emailed Mark Cuban, and Mark Cuban responded. And the original actual email was just to get him to hear about Box. If you remember at the time in 2004, 2005, he was actually one of the internet's most famous bloggers, and he had a blog, and we were just trying to get him to promote the product. In turn, he actually responded and was interested in investing in the company as soon as he learned a little bit more about what we were doing, and then we were able to bring him on as a funder of the business.
So how much money did he give you?
$350,000.
We are 10 years to the month, I believe, of the first venture capital investment in your company. Tell me what it was like to go out there for real money, like not just Mark Cuban money.
Yes, so it was a little bit. I think we felt really good about it as sort of this was our first time going through it, but we had real customers, real revenue, and a lot of interest. So I think that was certainly something that we felt good about. We thought it was the right thing for the business to really be able to accelerate growth. But it was a little bit, I don't know about intimidating, but we were learning some things on the fly. We certainly did have some questions about who would be the right fit, what do we need, all of those things. And I remember, going through it for the first time, it was just going down Sand Hill Road, almost door to door on a lot of days, just kind of firing each other up during meetings.
So you guys made a pivot along the way from consumer to enterprise, and I know that was really hard. Tell me how you made that decision, what debates you had, and
I think the biggest concern that at least I personally had was because we had founded the company on this mission of really focusing on end users, we didn't want to lose that as we went to the enterprise. So there was a big struggle because we didn't quite know, could we build an enterprise software company that would still have the sort of same consumer instincts and DNA that we had when we started the company. And I would credit kind of Jeff probably to most for sort of figuring out that we actually definitely had to pivot. So it was a sort of existential threat that we had. But then collectively we figured out that we could actually build a modern enterprise software company that wasn't going to compromise why we started the business in the first place.
That was Emily Chang with Jeff QUEISSER, Sam GHODS, Dylan Smith, and Aaron Levie, the founders of Box. And coming up, why the founders turned down a chance to be acquired and how they navigated their IPO. This weekend on Bloomberg Television, we will bring you all of our best interviews from the week, including our conversation with Twitter co-founder Biz Stone, Snapchat investor Jeremy Liu, and PlayStation exec Sean Layden. The best of Bloomberg technology. This Saturday. This is Bloomberg. Now, more of our conversation with the founders of Box. The four faced a major decision in 2011 when they had the opportunity to sell the company. Emily Chang sat down with Jeff QUEISSER, Sam GHODS, Dylan Smith, and Aaron Levie. She asked them how they navigated the crossroads.
And it was, certainly a lot of it came down to, pretty serious board discussions. But ultimately, when we thought about the big picture at every stage along our journey, and it's still true today, we thought about the size of our opportunity, and if we executed against that, have always held just a deeply rooted belief that we can create a lot more value for customers and for shareholders as an independent company versus as part of a larger organization. So, we take those sort of overtures seriously, but have always come down and been, very aligned behind building a very large independent company.
What year was this?
So there have been a few in the past. One of the more public was, I think it was 2010 or 11, 2011 with Citrix.
Okay, and so was that tough? I mean, did some of you want to sell? Some of you didn't want to sell? I mean,
probably our parents.
I think one of the things that's not a lot talked about when you're considering selling at that stage is that it doesn't really become about you anymore, like especially the founding team. It was probably more about the set of employees for whom it would have been like a life-changing kind of opportunity. And so you're not only making the decision for yourself and for the company, but you're making decisions for them of, are you willing to like take this risk and potentially have a much larger success, both in terms of career and financial gains and all this kind of stuff. So the burden of the decision, it almost tips in favor of selling, even though you may want to keep this company going. And I think that was a lot of the struggle that we had, is we thought we had a lot of potential to make this a very, very significant company in Silicon Valley and even in the world. And but there was this, factor of like there was a lot of people who are materially affected by this decision.
So was there any one of you, 2, 3, who were leaning towards maybe we should sell it?
Actually, I think we tried to be pretty intellectually honest and look at both sides, but in the end, I think we were all just 100% behind. We've got to keep this thing independent. We have a big, big opportunity in front of us, and it would be not a great idea to sell.
It was actually conveniently timed around when we were doing our retreat. So we ended up doing one of our offsites, and it was 12, 14 hours straight of just literally a T-chart of pros, cons, what do we want to do, how big of a company can we build, what are the risks, what would we tell employees, every single factor you could consider, and we debated it, and we didn't go in with a particular position, but we debated the heck out of it for a very long time, and then we ultimately came to the same conclusion, which is that we had so much more opportunity ahead of us than what we had already accomplished, and that was obviously led us to wanting to stay independent.
So tell me about the road to going public. Was that hard?
I mean, it was something that I think even shortly after we had turned down that acquisition offer, we had sort of, as a board, said, okay, if we're going to do this, then let's go big. It was really a sort of rallying cry for the board and I think the whole company, especially the people who were involved in that. And we raised a lot more money and had said, okay, we're going to build a very large, independent, public company. And so that was really the moment when we started thinking a lot more seriously about that. And so we were planning well in advance, did all the things you would expect that a company would do. And then in the late stages, as we felt we were really ready from an internal sort of team standpoint, financial standpoint, et cetera, and about 2 weeks after we had publicly filed, that is when the market went in a little bit of a southern direction and sentiment changed around high growth, high burn companies. And so we spent nearly a year publicly on file before we ultimately went public. And I would say that from just an overall sort of challenge of management leadership standpoint, that year was one of the trickier time periods.
So how did you get through that?
I think we tried to just be as clear and as transparent as possible with the company, and you're subject to all of the limits of being on file or almost being on file. But we tried to communicate regularly. Here's where we are. Here's how we think the market is recovering. And then that was probably the best tool we had. But I would just echo how difficult it was, because you're in this sort of semi-stasis of are you going to go out as a public company or not, and what's the timing on that?
And because of the quiet period, we weren't able to respond to many of those not nice things. So our employees, we know they're all reading this on the internet. Yeah. And so it was the struggle of like, how much do we respond or address it internally versus putting so much focus on it, like kind of the Barbra Streisand effect of we don't want to emphasize that this is a big deal, but you have to respond to it somehow. So it was, I think the key was just being really transparent, highly communicative, all the way up and down, not just in big presentations, but with individual employees as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of those probably situations where you're, now that you're a couple of years out, you're probably glad it happened in terms of it really tests your culture, it tests your organization, it tests the skills of all of your managers, because it is an instant sort of culling of who's in it for the long run, who's really focused on what we're trying to do, and who can withstand some of the negative commentary and some of the negative reaction, and who really wants to go build a long-term business.
That really was the first time that we had been anything but sort of the darling of Silicon Valley, and so that was certainly a challenging experience, but I think made us stronger. Is from an overall business point of view as well, it really we saw very viscerally the need to improve our operating profile, drive that, and it's something that we sort of knew intellectually and we talked about with our executive team, but I think the company seeing that and really being sort of a forcing function to mature our thinking as a company was also pretty helpful, especially looking back at sort of a lot of the late stage private companies maybe not getting that same sort of reaction or message when we did.
You've got Amazon and Google and Microsoft, working hard to own the cloud, and you guys are still there. Are you concerned about that?
I would actually say that a lot of the moves recently that you've seen in the industry, whether it's Microsoft or Amazon or Google or whatever, have generally actually been highly positive to both our business, our technology strategy, our long-term prospects. The biggest issue we had 5 years ago was trying to convince people of the cloud and convince large enterprises that they can move their most important information to the cloud. And that was a very expensive effort because we were only a few hundred employees trying to tell companies like General Electric and Walmart and Eli Lilly and Procter & Gamble that they should do this. And it's now helpful to have some of the biggest names in the industry move to this architecture. And importantly, we're now partnering with each of those companies where we can both build on top of their clouds, but also integrate into the applications that they use. So far, all of the momentum that we've seen, all of the big moves from Google Cloud with Diane Green and G Suite, Amazon and them sort of driving down the price of computing, Microsoft with Office 365, these things have all actually served to benefit our strategy and how customers use our products. So far, it's been highly positive, and it all sort of serves to disrupt the legacy architectures of technology.
M&A is obviously heating up. We're seeing M&A happen everywhere. I mean, are you guys thinking again about potentially selling? What do you want to do?
We are a roughly $400 million revenue company. The market's 100 times that size, and we still feel really good about our position. Some of the things that Aaron mentioned, just the trajectory we're seeing in the business, that we always need to be thinking about what's right for shareholders, what's right for the company, what's right for customers, but we are as excited as we ever have been about the prospects ahead and feel really good about what we're doing as an independent company.
What advice do you have for other founders, other early founding teams, which often do start out as friends, even though they may not stay friends?
I would say that your team matters much more than your idea. Your idea is going to change, it's going to morph, it's going to evolve, but find the right people and spend a meaningful amount of time finding the right team, and from that point I think you can go build a great business sort of based on whatever vector you go.
And obviously you guys started so young and you grew up with this company. Aaron, did you ever get advice from like Mark Zuckerberg or Larry Page or some of the founders that we all know and look up to about building your team?
Yeah, I mean, probably more generic company feedback from folks in the technology world. So, people like Mark Benioff, John Chambers, Michael Dell have been extremely kind of helpful over the years in terms of just providing advisement and help, and if we have a strategic issue or building out the organization. And I think, because of how uncharacteristic it is to be able to build a company with a few close friends, I think we're kind of writing the lessons on how to do that, and so not a lot of people to go to about that specific issue. But I think what Sam and Jeff said is, again, if you can get it working right, where you have such a high degree of trust in your sort of founding team, that hopefully will kind of cascade and permeate throughout an organization, where then everyone in the organization understands that this is going to be an environment where we trust each other. We're going to push on each other like mad, and there's going to be a lot of conflict, where there's going to be a lot of sort of arguing over the issue and the idea, but that's not going to change the level of trust that we have in one another.
That was Emily Chang with Jeff QUEISSER, Sam GHODS, Dylan Smith, and Aaron Levie, the founders of Box. One stock we're watching, shares of AMD edged higher after Alibaba said it will use the company's chips for cloud services. Alibaba is working on expanding the range of services it offers over the internet and will work with AMD to use the chip maker's Radeon Pro graphics. Analysts say the deal will kickstart AMD's return to the lucrative data center market dominated by Intel. Another story we're watching, CBS is close to hiring Goldman Sachs and JPMorgan Chase as it considers a potential merger with Viacom. This is according to people familiar with the matter. Viacom Sherry Redstone and her 93-year-old father, Sumner, are trying to revive the embattled company amid rating declines. A potential merger would put the company under the leadership of CBS CEO Les Moonves. And coming up, details of the next robotic visitor to the Red Planet. Europe's space agency gears up for a crucial weekend of work. That story next. This day in tech history, 69 years ago today, U.S. Air Force Captain Chuck Yeager became the first person to fly faster than the speed of sound. He was released through the bomb bay doors of a B-29 aircraft. Yeager fired his X-1 rocket plane over Rogers Dry Lake in Southern California, shooting to 40,000 feet and exceeding a speed of 662 miles per hour. Witnesses reported hearing a strange bang, which turned out to be a sonic boom. And in this edition of Out of This World, a European spacecraft is gearing up for the final leg of its journey to Mars. At around 4 p.m. UK time on Sunday, the European Space Agency's probe will detach from the mothership and prepare for a complicated landing Wednesday. This is the agency's first probe to attempt the difficult landing since the Beagle 2, which vanished in 2003. This new rover will test a parachute and retro-rocket landing system. It's also carrying a small instrument package to record wind speed, humidity, pressure, and temperature at the landing site. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Next week, we have an all-star lineup of guests, including Sean Parker, Chamath Palihapitiya, and Sebastian Thrun. Remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out on @BloombergTechTV. This is Bloomberg. Have a wonderful weekend.